All right. Good evening, everyone. Is that working? Yeah. Okay, good. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Wisest's live streaming event. It's our second one in collaboration with Science Odyssey Week for 2019. This live streaming series, which is called Discovering a Whole New World, is designed to help you, the students, connect with a diversity of mentors just from the comfort of your school. So my name is Joelle. I'm the Outreach Coordinator for Wisest, and today we're going to be having an intimate discussion with these three lovely people beside me. So we encourage you to engage with them, ask lots of questions live if any of you did. And so this session is called STEM Impacting Our Daily Lives. So we're going to learn a little bit more about how STEM can impact our communities every day. So now let's get started with a quick introduction. So I'm going to ask you to introduce yourselves one at a time with your name, your current career situation, and let's start with you, Marilee.
Hi, I'm Marilee Stevens. I'm actually, I have my PhD in neuroscience from the University of Alberta, my bachelor's from the University of Waterloo in Ontario, and it's in kinesiology, so the study of human movement, and a master's in biomechanics. I'm very oriented into biology and physics of human beings. I am currently a lecturer here at the University of Alberta in the Department of Biomedical Engineering. Sorry. And I also work in a lab that deals with spinal cord injury in the Neuroscience and Mental Health Institute.
Very cool. Great.
Mm-hmm. Hi, my name is Samiha Sajida. I just finished my second year of honors neuroscience as my undergrad. I work in a lab, a neurosurgery research lab, and my work involves looking at trigeminal neuralgia and predicting surgery outcomes of its patients using certain biomarkers. I am also currently employed at Neogen Canada in their genomics division, and I am the DNA technician that performs all sorts of DNA arrangements and extractions to sequence cattle DNA to make sure that you're getting the best beef that you can.
Very cool. Very cool. And Quinn?
Cool. Hi, I'm Quinn. I just finished a master's degree in biomedical engineering. So I did an undergraduate degree in mechanical engineering with a biomedical option, we call it, which is sort of like a minor. And then I did my master's in a lab that works with prosthetic device technology. And now that I'm done, I'm still working in the lab as a research assistant.
Very cool. Yeah, and in case I jump in with any other feedback, I have a bachelor's in forest health, which is kind of a combination forestry biology degree, and I did my master's in insect pathology. So I studied fungal diseases of insects for integrated pest management purposes. So very different from you three, but that's okay. So let's get started off with these questions. The obvious question, how do you use STEM on a daily basis, both with your school and career and outside of it? Marilee, let's start with you.
Well, obviously, in my teaching of biomedical engineering students, I actually use both the science part of STEM and the engineering part of STEM quite a bit. I don't have a degree in engineering, which is, as Quinn will tell you, is very different than most of the professors in the Faculty of Engineering, but I did take a number of engineering courses in my undergrad, so I have a little bit of that mindset. And it's just interesting because obviously at work, I do a lot of looking at physics and chemistry, because the lab I work in, we look at applying various drugs to see the effect on the spinal cords in an animal model, both before a spinal cord injury and afterwards. So there's a lot of chemistry, obviously biology, because we're working in biological systems, but I also, with my biomechanics background, we do a lot of analysis of the motor outcomes from this injury. So there's a lot of physics involved in that. So it's a very interdisciplinary type of work in terms of looking at the different sciences. And then in my daily life, I was actually just saying I do a lot of reading of books related to STEM-related work. But the funny thing is, ever since I started working in the field of neurological disorders and that, I see people on the street and I start diagnosing them, even though I'm not an MD, which is probably something you shouldn't do, I fully admit. I'm like, oh yeah, that person, Parkinson's, or yeah, that person obviously maybe has a touch of CP because they walk cerebral palsy. Sorry, I will use acronyms and I will try and catch myself because I use them in my daily life. But yeah, no, I'm just ever since I was a little kid, I'm one of 5 kids, and was the one that was a very science oriented person. So my poor parents had to answer a lot of questions that luckily my mom was an RN, so she had a little bit of, but my dad would just kind of like, I don't know. Still I don't know. It's just, I just find it all fascinating. So
Great.
yeah.
Awesome. So in terms of school, I'm still an undergrad. So my degree requires me to take chemistry, biochemistry, physiology, anatomy, physics, organic chemistry, which is different from the other 2 chemistries I mentioned. So tons of chemistry for a neuroscience undergrad. And then we have really interesting classes where we learn about clinical neuroscience. So the class I finished this last semester, we talked about a variety of neurological disorders and their clinical manifestations and how to diagnose them using the DSM-5. However, again, I'm not qualified, but I did do one thing. I worked the Alberta election this past election, and during my training, there was a really sweet older lady sitting beside me, and she had these essential tremors, and they were so impeding on her life that she couldn't even write properly. So I was talking to her, and I was like, maybe you should go to a neurologist. Did you go to a doctor? And she was like, I don't trust doctors. So then she ended up kind of getting mad at me because I suggested she go see a neurologist. So yeah, don't do that. Otherwise, my studies varies a lot from what I do in terms of my research and my work. My courses are very theoretical. We have lab components where we learn processes and stuff. However, especially in my neurosurgical research, clinical research is very different from what we think of as wet bench or basic science research. On that end, I mostly deal with data, statistical analysis, finding what's significant, and also dealing with patients because you have to go and get their MRIs done, and then I did some work in Parkinson's, so I actually in a gait study, so I actually had to be there and assist the patient as they walked back and forth, and if they fell, like they would fall on me and I would catch them. So it's very different. And in my job as a DNA tech at Neogen Canada, it's a whole other application of wet lab techniques. Industrial science is very different from academic science, as I've been learning in the past few weeks. It's very deadline oriented, and you know what you want to do or what you need to get done. You have a task and you have a deadline to finish it, and you need to do it as accurately and efficiently as possible. So my life is really full of the whole spectrum, if you have that, when you go to study science, that you will have. As for my daily life, I love to explain my family's behavior in terms of psychology, right? So they get really mad at me for that because, like, why are you analyzing us all the time? But I know I'm right. Other than that, I love to read scientific literature just for my own pleasure. Even anthropological stuff like Sapiens, we were talking about that. And yeah, I mean, I honestly think that anything short of just being a cave person, everything around us is STEM. The wheel, the wall, going to the moon, CRISPR, which is one of the latest things we have. Everything we as humanity have done and surround ourselves with, even the chair we're sitting in, that's technology and that's STEM. And to think of it as just this exclusive kind of coveted field that only certain special people get into I don't think that's the right attitude to have, especially as students. So don't be scared of it. I wasn't.
Oh, great. Good. How about you?
Yeah, so I work in a prosthetics lab, as I mentioned, and so we deal a lot with robots. So I think that's kind of the cool part. So I'll talk a little bit about how STEM comes into play with robots. So manipulating robots is actually a lot of math. So I do a lot of math. So if you enjoy math, it's a good field to consider. Math and physics, basically, and then also making robots is a lot of like mechanical engineering and combined with electrical engineering. So understanding both like the mechanics of the physical thing that you're building and how to power it and control it. And then we also work a lot with like assessing prosthetic devices. And so that's also a lot of data analysis and math too. Yeah, and then the other part is STEM in my daily life outside of work. And yeah, I actually really like what you said about, I think like STEM is everywhere and we don't really even think about it that much anymore. We all use technology so much. But yeah, I like making things as like a hobby, which obviously is like a little bit of STEM. And I really like learning. I think that's like the biggest thing that I've taken from my degree is like how to learn new things efficiently.
Great. No, that's fantastic. So I know you've all briefly touched on this a bit, but how does the work that you do impact the greater world around you?
Okay, well, I have to, okay, so I like to think, I'm not claiming any credit for this, but I like to think the people that come through my classes, I don't maybe do the most direct work in terms of STEM, in terms of producing things, but I like to think by passing along the information I have in my classes. And full disclosure, Quinn's taken my classes, so she can tell you whether it works or not. I like to think by I either, make them think about, what's out there, all that sort of stuff. But the other interesting thing is through the research I do in the lab, even though it's an animal model, we've actually been able to take some of our findings, and a collaborator is now doing human clinical trials with some of them. So hopefully, though it usually takes anywhere from 5 to 10 to 15 years, depending on, we'll actually see some of the results from our work being actually out in the clinic in maybe a decade's time, because there's been some interesting developments. Though I joke that the main principal investigator in the lab I work in, who's a very good friend of mine, he seems to be wanting to rewrite all the textbooks. Because everything we do, it comes out, oh, that's not right, because the textbooks say that. And he's like, no, the textbook's wrong. I'm like, oh, great. So then I have to go, now, do I actually start teaching this new stuff, or do we wait for a while and stick with the textbooks? But
well, that's the exciting part about science, though,
well, that's right. The textbooks are always changing.
Yeah, absolutely. Because we're constantly discovering new things.
So, so I like to think I have a little bit of a direct impact in the STEM field, but I actually think my input's more indirect in trying to get my students interested in. Now, admittedly, a lot of them are already in engineering, so they're already interested in STEM, but maybe get their brains working in certain areas that they might not have thought about.
Great. I think having a great prof who is very passionate about what she or he does is very important as a student, from personal experience, to kind of get you really excited about it too. For me, my work, especially in my neurosurgery research lab, that work is it's very hands-on with people. So any results that we have, it will directly affect those people, but it's a very small subset of patients, right? So it's patients who have trigeminal neuralgia, which is a neurological disorder. It affects mostly unilaterally, so one side of your face, and you've got these shooting pains and you don't know why it's happening. Most of the time, it goes away with medication or surgery. about 20 to 25% have it returned after surgery, and we're trying to figure out why that happens and whether before surgery we can predict who will have the pain return and who will not. So yes, it affects a very small population, but I think it's a huge impact, because even if we can alleviate that daily pain for one person, it's a huge contribution. Because those of us who don't have it, we cannot really imagine what it feels like, that can't even smile or chew or eat properly because your face is in such excruciating pain. So yeah, we've got a paper and it's on its way to publication, and it has some really interesting findings, and a lot of it can be related to other neurological disorders such as multiple sclerosis, and that's another avenue that we're thinking of exploring. As for my job at Neogen, it's very direct, we provide really a lot of information to farmers and other people in the agriculture and cattle industry about which type of animal is best for what. So genetic analysis can yield information such as what kind of meat, like what the quality or the texture of the meat will be, whether there are any genetic abnormalities that might affect the consumer. So it really is about food safety and safety of the greater population. And Neogen is a worldwide company, so we also have meat exchanges and data exchanges with Australia. So it's not only localized within Canada, it's also international.
Very cool. How does the work you do currently impact the world around you?
Thank you for repeating the question. Actually one of the things that I love about my field, biomedical engineering, and especially the lab that I work in, is that it's very focused on application to real world problems. So a lot of what we do is really driven by trying to get things into the clinics and being used by people. So for me specifically, I've been working a lot on methods for assessing prosthetic device technology, and as we're developing those, there's like a big focus on getting other people in the world to use these assessments, which helps drive development of these technologies in directions that are beneficial, and also helps to justify spending on these technologies by government agencies and stuff. And so that's one really direct thing that I do. And then also just like in the lab in general, everything we do is really focused on getting things into the clinic, getting new ways of like controlling prosthetic devices and training people to use them better and stuff like that.
It should be noted the lab Quinn works in is very cutting edge for upper limb prosthetic development. It's really one of the ones at the forefront for looking at control. It's a very cool place to work. I wish I worked.
Great. Well, okay. So we'll kind of ask two questions in one now. Okay. First off, what exposure did you have to STEM when you were a kid? Number one, and then kind of part two is if that had any influence on your main inspiration to decide to work in the STEM field.
Okay, this is just giving you a little bit of a timeline as to how old I am, but the term STEM wasn't really used when I was in school. Because let's say I'm north of 50 and we'll leave it there. But there was, I grew up on a farm, and a lot of the interest I had in the human body is I knew a number of people who had suffered various farming accidents. There was a young man in my elementary school that had a prosthetic limb because he had lost an arm at like the age of 4. Mm-hmm. Various other, and I was just always fascinated by how do people adapt when they have injuries. And so that was one of the reasons that kind of led me to where I went. The other thing is, and I don't know. I actually was thinking about this earlier because when I was asked to be on the panel, I know that there's this perception out there that teachers in schools tend to, go to the boys for when it's science and math, and go to the girls maybe for when it's like English and arts based and all that. I don't remember either in elementary school or high school, like maybe I was just obnoxious enough and such a pain with let me answer that. But my teachers all seemed to just be very encouraging when I obviously showed an aptitude for science and for math. And I still remember in about grade 9 or 10, we did a aptitude test for what type of career you should go into. And mine came back research scientist. It was like very obvious. Like,
So did mine.
Research scientist, yes.
Yeah.
And all my teachers were very encouraging, even though I have to admit it sounds bad, but like I think across the sciences and math in my high school, I had one female
Really?
math. I think she was a math teacher. Yeah, none of my science teachers were were female. Sorry, but they were all like. And the other thing I think helped is my parents. My mom is both a elementary school teacher and an RN, and a registered nurse, and my dad was a farmer. And but they were very much, we'll support you in whatever you want to do. They weren't expecting me to choose to do this or do that, or any of my brothers and sister that way. So when I showed an aptitude towards that, my mom was like, oh, well, here's my nursing textbooks, and here's my journals and all this sort of stuff. So
That's great.
between teachers and my parents, they were just extremely encouraging. But there was no STEM, and there was like no wisest, as far as I knew, at any of the universities close to my hometown. And so, but it wasn't like, oh, you can't go into science because you're a girl. I never got that. So
Well,
that
that's
was
great.
Yeah, that
That's a
was
good
like
thing.
yeah. Though I probably wouldn't have listened to them anyway. Now I think about it.
That's great. So for me, I immigrated here with my family and started grade 4 here. Well, we're citizens now, but I come from Bangladesh. It's a little country right beside India, and no, it's not the same thing as India. I know a lot of people say it's different. And there, I was 6 years old, and I remember this. That there was we watched Indian like soap operas and stuff, and then we had like hospital dramas just like they have here, like Grey's Anatomy or ER, whatever. And there was one hospital show where it was focused around a bunch of interns, like their first year and the shenanigans and their like love interests and their career difficulties. And I loved that show. And the first time I saw it, it ended. I loved it. I turned to my mother and I said, I want to be a doctor. And thus my fate was sealed by me, no one else. So my parents are the most supportive and encouraging people ever. After coming here, there is always that fear amongst immigrants that one, your child will lose their identity. Or are not in touch with their culture, and second is that they will probably not be like successful for whatever reason. So it's very important for us to do well in school and stuff. But I took that like 3 steps above what the norm is here. And I've done a lot of things in terms of my career that I was a pioneer, not just my high school or university or peers, but within my community as well. For example, I was the first one to I did full IB, International Baccalaureate in high school, and I was the very first one to get the IB World Student Conference Scholarship in Edmonton and area. No one has done that before. And I actually went to Denver for 8 days and stayed in the dorms there at Denver University. And we had so many great activities and guest speakers. And that led me to be an official TEDx speaker the next year. So it was kind of like a cascade of one thing after another. But what started all that was that one hospital show. And this other thing. So I like to think about things a lot and come up with crazy theories. So when I come from a family of mostly engineers, it's only my father that is finance, banking, all that commerce side. So I thought that all that is very interesting. Sorry, guys. It is all very interesting, but it doesn't matter if you're talking about that if you drop dead, right? It really doesn't matter. So my interest is what is stopping you from dropping dead at this very moment, right? So that's what I was really interested in, because in my mind, that's the key. That's the foundation. You're alive, and then all of this happens, everything else. What's keeping you alive? And if you are alive, what's making your health better? So I think I really struck the very fundamental question of life. So
What's keeping you alive? Yeah, that is
what's keeping you alive?
That's the fundamental question of life. Yeah.
So all of my focus from then on has been that. And at first it started as, just exploring my interests. And then as I got into, grade 9, grade 10, it became more centered towards healthcare and education. So I worked and volunteered at 3-4 hospitals during my high school year. I had no friends, that's fine. And then I had all these opportunities that really I feel like I did seal my path at 6, or my fate at 6, but then I paved the path without knowing that I was kind of going towards the destination. And my teachers, I had amazing teachers. I had my junior high teacher, her name is Tammy Lynn Kluchka. I don't know if she's watching. I sent her the link. I call her Mama. She's like my second mother. In junior high, I went into what's called a co-graduate program. So it was an academic program, and it was hard. It was hard as I was only in Canada for 2 years at that time. And it was hard for me because it was an adjustment, and it was a K-9 school. So I went into grade 6, and all those kids have been there since kindergarten. And I was ready to give up. Like, science was hard. I'm like, I don't get this. This is tough. And then Miss Kluchka came in grade 7, and her whole style of teaching and how caring she was about, like, you understanding, like learning to understand instead of just memorize and get a good grade, which is what most of the kids there were doing anyways, because, competition. It really struck a chord with me, and I stuck with her throughout the next 3 years. And she's still here today. I keep in touch with her regularly. And honestly, she is one of the most inspiring people in STEM that made me realize that I can do this, because I really was struggling at that point. And I feel like I always say that she kind of like pulled me out of it and kind of sent me on my way where I was supposed to go.
That's great. How about you, Quinn? What exposure did you have as a kid, and what kind of inspired you to do the work that you do?
So I also feel like STEM was not really something people were talking about it in like the STEM way when I was a kid either. But I was raised by, my mom's a teacher, elementary school teacher, and my dad's an accountant. And they just always sort of made sure that I was doing well in school and then like learning constantly. Like I would, like, over the summer I was like having to do the homework for like the next year. So I'd be like, I don't know. That's like what it's like.
I preferred that than what I had to do, which was working in the fields.
Farming.
Yeah,
sure.
I think I'd actually prefer doing the homework, shockingly enough.
Yeah, that's the life of being a teacher's child, I guess. And so I was always kind of like fairly good at school, but it was more of just like a thing that I did. Like it was like a chore at that point. I don't think that it was like until high school that I was really like, oh, I also kind of enjoy learning this stuff. So I guess I kind of owe them a debt of gratitude for that, because they made learning always just something that was just part of life, and you just did. I didn't really realize until later. But yeah, and then what's the second part is why.
What inspired you to get into your field?
I think I have like a pretty typical background story for why I chose biomedical engineering specifically, which was that in high school, when you start doing like the differentiated sciences, I kind of really liked each of them as I encountered them. And the last two that I encountered were biology and then physics. And so, when I was doing biology, I was like, I'll definitely do something in medicine or related to this because I really like it. And then I did physics and I really liked it too. So then I had a conundrum, and then I found out biomedical engineering exists. So I went into it.
Totally understands.
Great.
Yep.
And I was very different from all of you in that I was like that kid outside picking up bugs and trying to identify them. And
Hey, I had a collection of ladybugs that I
Did you?
remember in a jar.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think that's a sign of an inquisitive mind, which
it
is
is,
really
yeah.
good.
Well, and then I went and studied insects, so it
Yeah.
grew up and did that anyway.
Well,
Yeah.
during the summer, my dad made me learn how to type, and I thought it was the worst punishment ever. This was like after grade 5,
Well,
but I thank him now because
Mhm.
God, it helped me so much on my papers.
Oh, this is a little old. None of you watching will understand this, but I still remember in the very last year of my high school, they offered a computing course, because I was in high school this was in Ontario. They had a grade 13 at the time. You're like, oh no, next year of high school. But this would have been in 1984, 85. And I'm like, I'm not taking computing. I'm never going to use computers. I'm going to work with human beings. Yeah, I have no ability to look into the future. None. I'm like, oh, that's all I do every day now is I'm either on my phone or on my computer or something like that. I'm like, right. Yeah, not projecting at all there.
Yeah. Well, and I also have to say, I'm also the daughter of an elementary school teacher. And so it's
wow.
interesting that 3 out of the 4 of us
Yeah.
are elementary school teacher parents. Okay, so now I want to move on to some of the questions that were actually submitted online, which is really cool ahead of time.
Well, I just wanted to say my mom is an early childhood educator. So
Oh my gosh.
there we go.
So all of us.
We all had education in the back of our heads.
Yes, so we were all taught that learning is great.
Right.
It's really
So
fun.
important.
It is. It's really important. It's fun.
Well, I
like
actually have my dad unfortunately couldn't go to high school because he was old enough. He had to stay. They didn't have buses at the time, and he was out on the farm, and so he would have had to move into town. And my grandfather was like, "I need you here," and so my dad always said, "I don't care what you do, but I want you to get an education," because he always regretted. He got his grade 8. But
I think that's so great because from personal experience, I know some people whose parents actually did not go to any sort of post-secondary, just barely finished high school, and it's such a weird mentality that they wanted the same for their child. They did not want them to go on to post-secondary or anything. They just wanted them to straight go into the workforce. But I think like in today's day and age, you really need to have some sort of a credential after your name, or in whether that be a trades job or an academic thing, right? So yeah, it's so great that your parents understood that importance.
oh yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
Absolutely. All right. So I love all the answers so far. You're all so awesome and helpful. It's really great. So let's get into some of these questions from teachers and students that have been submitted. The first one is, how diverse would you say is the STEM community? So in your experience, has that changed over time?
Well, this is both from my experience and from just various areas I've done some research in. This is personal research, not related to my job at all. But STEM is actually quite diverse. Well, as you mentioned, like basically everything around us is related to STEM in some point. But I actually was thinking about it just in my area of neuroscience related. You can get everyone from people who do like control systems for prosthetics and trying to tie that into the nervous system to people working on genetics. I know people who have engineering backgrounds, who have physiology backgrounds, pharmacology backgrounds, psychology backgrounds, computer science backgrounds, and they're all working in this kind of general goal. So it's quite amazing. And also the one thing I've noticed across my many years of this is people can start on one path and totally staying within STEM and even staying within a fairly defined field, go in various places.
Yeah.
My the investigator I work with, he actually is an electrical engineer, who ended up doing robotics at MIT for a while, and then got more into the neurophysiology side and started spinal cord injury, but then started looking at the neuropharmacology side. So he's gone from being an electrical engineer
Wow.
to basically a pharmacologist in the span of about 40 years.
Wow.
So yeah, so it's a very diverse field, and people, jump fields a little bit. So there are, people who might start out in engineering and end up going into medicine and various things like that. So I know some people, and I was like this, I fully admit, I got into university and I was like, okay, this is the area I'm working in and I'm never going to shift and all that sort of stuff, but people shift all the time. I probably shift the least of some of the people I know, type of thing. So you can, and people of all different backgrounds, people of, like I said, I come from a farming community, and I have friends whose parents worked, one of my best friend's dads worked for the railroad, and another one worked for the Canadian government. And so you get people from all over and doing all different types of stuff. So it's an extremely diverse area.
Yeah, so definitely. Obviously, I don't have as much experience, but from what I've seen in my different school area or workplace or research, that it's true that there's all sorts of people there, and there's diversity also in terms of like demographical. You have tons of you have all sorts of ethnicities, religion, sexual orientation, and we all have a common goal of moving science forward. And I think one of the challenges is to kind of like in any other community where you have a diverse group of people, both in terms of their background and their abilities, is how to kind of retain your identity while appreciating and learning from the uniqueness of the others, of other people that you're working with. So that in itself is a skill. And being in STEM, you would think like, oh, we are all really nerdy, introverted scientists. No, we're not. I mean, some of them are, but a lot of them are not. And we like to have fun just as much. And it really is a very nice and social community from what I've seen. So there's no reason to think that just because you're going into STEM, you have to be like this brooding person sitting in a corner and you don't want to talk to anybody. No, we have fun.
That's a great point. And I think there's countless amounts of research that shows that the more diverse the group is in terms of backgrounds and abilities, the stronger and more accomplished you can be in research in general, right? So everybody brings different perspectives to the table.
Yeah. Exactly. So, the free exchange of ideas is I think what got STEM forward to this point in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you think, Quinn?
I think it depends a lot on where you are, and I can only speak to like my own experiences, which is that I think I've been really lucky to work with people who are really good at surrounding themselves with like a diverse community. So I feel like the lab that I work in and everyone I've worked with has been, quite good at that. But I don't think that means that it's true everywhere. I definitely know that there are other research labs that are very sort of uni-ethnic.
Yes, that is a problem.
And that is still a thing. Some people still prefer to sort of like hire other people that are
I do think that it's slow going. People are comfortable with certain people. I don't want to get too specific about that. But there are labs where diversity in that is and this is the same with workplaces. I should say, even though I work in academia, I have had chances to work for big business. I've had chances to work for the government. And you can get very, I guess, insular, if you want to think about that environments. And they work for the people that work in them. I'm not going to say otherwise, but it's when you're very like-minded and amongst all the people that work there, it is hard to sometimes open yourself up to other people. And that's hopefully changing. WISES has been an area that's been working with that, especially for integrating different genders and so forth. But it's not perfect. And I think we're
it
a long
definitely
way.
is not.
But I have to say, just to give you an example, my older brother is an electrical engineer. He got his electrical engineering degree from Waterloo in '83. So yes, it was a long time ago. In his class of 200 students, of the electrical engineering students, there was 2 females.
Wow.
It's much better now. It's still not 50-50. There's still not to parity, but it's much better now. So, the one joke that we used to have is I was part of the faculty that was the one faculty on campus that actually had more women than men. So the engineers always invited us, my faculty, to co-host pubs and that with them because they just wanted girls there. So I'd be like showing up and my brother would be like, why are you here? And I'm like, you guys invited us. If you don't want me to come, tell me not to come. But he's like, I can't deal with you.
I mean, it definitely isn't like a rosy picture, but I do think with the new generation coming in and people becoming so much more open, that it definitely is very hopeful that it is changing, and a lot of the older traditional stereotypical kind of standards are going away.
Yeah, even when I was an undergrad, my undergrad was in half forestry, half biology. I ended up taking a lot of forestry classes, and I was used to being one of only 1 or 2 women, and all the guys all looked the same. And, and I remember there was one class that I took, I think it was my senior year, my last year of university, where there were 3 girls in the class of 30, and the professor was so excited about it that he mentioned it every class.
We have 3 girls.
We have 3 girls in our forestry class this year. So our soil culture class is very exciting. But yeah, but I see that changing, and I think it's slowly but surely the tides are starting to turn. But yeah, great. All right, well, we have time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions. Yes, okay. It's hard to believe this hour's flying by.
I know, this is so much
fun. The next question that was submitted this was by a student. How can STEM careers have a social impact in world communities? It's a tough question. I know. It's a good question.
Actually, no, it's a very good question. One, I think, and again, this is only my opinion. Feel free to disagree. I think working in what I would call more pragmatic areas, if you want to call it that, you learn how to communicate in a different way. You learn how to communicate in a fairly, I'm not rational, I do not claim to be rational, but a more rational way sometimes. And I do think sometimes having that slight degree of logic or rationality when you try and communicate ideas across society, that doesn't mean I don't listen to certain people in certain political positions and not want to throttle them at times. I fully admit I'm not that rational, but I do think there's a way that you can learn how to exchange ideas because you're taught to base your things on facts, so forth, that if you learn how to present facts and back it up, your statement with a rationale, I don't know if you want to say it gives it more weight. So I think even though it's not directly maybe related to the material you'll learn in STEM, it's how you learn to relate that material that can also help across societal boundaries and so forth. Now, that's, as I said, that's my opinion. I think there's a possibility, but I also think, given that I study humans are very, what's the word I want? Even if they think logically, they might not always present it in the most logical manner. So there are times where that doesn't always hold up. And I fully admit, I can be an example of that. I know it's not obvious, but I was a redhead in my youth, and believe me, the temper was there.
The stereotype holds up, hey?
What's that?
The stereotype holds up?
Oh, in me. Not in me. I'm not, but in me, yes. There was a lot of times it was like, okay. My mother'd be like, just grit your teeth and count to 10, because she could see my temperature.
Oh my goodness.
But yeah.
So that's definitely, I love what she said, and I promised my mom I wouldn't get too political and social justice on it. She specifically told me to write it down. For me, I think that there is, with all the advancements that we have and open-mindedness, the internet, there is still a lot of misinformation out there and a lot of pride in being misinformed. Not to name any names, but specific leaders have exemplified that in their conduct and speech. So that is more accepted, I feel like, nowadays. And one of the dangers in that is scientific thought and rationale and facts are being denied to the point where it is actually harming world communities. For example, the anti-vaxxer movement, right? And that's something that really bugs me because I work with children. I work with children who are on the autism spectrum and also with CP, cerebral palsy. And we work with improving their physical literacy, right? And also in the process, their social skills are being built. And I see that children, whether they have some sort of a different ability or whether they are not on the spectrum, they're vulnerable, right? And especially when parents think that big pharma is a good reason to keep their children or to push their children in the throes of harm just to prove a point and ignore scientific rationale. That really angers me. And as a person who understands I think the very logical and simple explanation of how vaccines work, I think that good communicators who are in sciences can appeal to that somewhat irrational side of humans, not only with facts, but also with the emotions that come with those facts, because it is true that like an emotional kind of response or a statement would resonate with a person longer and be deeper into their mind than like just a scientific fact. So I think that's something that's good, but also that we can improve on, because it is so true that just presenting a list of diseases that are preventable by vaccines, that like the measles are back, that's obviously not working. Right? So using our scientific minds and the data that we have, I think there is an opportunity to improve how we communicate that to the layman, to the mass, in a way that could resonate with them better than big pharma is trying to take our money.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think that's why science communication is becoming so much a part of the forefront now. We need scientists and engineers and everybody to be able to translate their knowledge that they obtain in their daily work and to be able to put it out there to the public, which is kind of what we're doing right now. Yeah, that's good. What do you think, STEM? Quinn, how can STEM careers have a social impact in the world community?
I think there are a lot of ways. And I really like what you both said. And just to kind of add one thing that I thought of is there are some really great organizations that are all focused around kind of like improving the world community, like Doctors Without Borders and Engineers Without Borders, which are really cool organizations that are focused on kind of taking kind of like STEM training and applying it to improve the world. And that doesn't always look like exactly what you expect, but it can lead to like really cool things. Like I know of like an engineer whose job is to like go into disaster zones, like where there's been a hurricane or an earthquake and the infrastructure is destroyed, and like figure out the logistics of rebuilding those communities. And that's like an application of engineering knowledge to
definitely.
like improving the world.
To talk even to Quinn's particular field of prosthetics, there's actually been quite a few organizations go into what we would call second and third world countries, because most of our first world prosthetics are actually quite expensive. And yet 80% of the people who suffer and need prosthetics are in the second and third world countries. And so there's been actually a lot of development using like 3D printing and other ways of getting costs down, that you can buy, you can buy. You can build these relatively inexpensive prosthetics for these people that live in these second and third world countries, so they can actually be able to go back to normal life, whatever normal life you want to call it, without having to, bankrupt their families and all this sort of stuff. So and anytime you can take someone who is at a disadvantage and get them back into the workforce and get them back into whatever normal is, society, it's a benefit for not just them, but for their society. So it's always very helpful.
Exactly. And stuff like, WHO, the World Health Organization, they obviously do great work. And they employ a lot of STEM people as well as like humanities and stuff. So there's a lot of ways that it could be intertwined into making a positive change in the global community.
Yeah, absolutely.
The one, and this is again maybe getting a touch political, unfortunately, and this is not necessarily a bad thing or a good thing, because STEM has been actually very productive, sciences, engineering, so forth. Our technology is actually vastly ahead of our ethics. Vastly ahead of our ethics.
Yeah.
And as a result, my sister's a lawyer, so that's another qualification where I'm getting a little bit of, and she fully admits the law is going to take quite a bit of time, and that's why we see some of maybe the drawbacks to some of the technology that's out there, that whether it's various social media, that I have to admit, as a kid, social media, I mean, we still had pen pals where you had to write like actual letters and put them in snail mail and send them across the planet and then wait 3 weeks to hear back. So there was no instantaneous communication. There was none. So I have to admit, I don't know particularly what it's like to be a young person in the environment nowadays, because I'd be like, I don't know if I get out of bed a lot of mornings after hearing about what some people go through nowadays. I'm just like, ugh. Yeah. So there, much as we're having these vast technological advances, I do think we need to occasionally, in terms of the social aspect, we do need to think a little bit. Like there needs to be some thought process, because technology is great, science is great, so forth. We just have to be careful because, as I said, we are humans and we're not perfect, or at least I fully admit. Maybe you three are perfect. I'm not perfect. We have a little bit of adjustment to make, hopefully in the next, I'd like to say in my lifetime, but we'll get to where we've got that kind of settled. But it's always been the case. Technology has always been on a little bit ahead of the legal ethical practices. So that's something that we have to think about when it comes to the social aspects of some
to
of
answer
this.
your question, how we deal with all the horribleness is selective attention.
Oh, is that
So that's where our
Just
attention
ignore it.
span has also actually gone down.
Yes,
So
that's true.
that's bad too.
Yeah.
That's very true. All right, well, we have just a couple minutes left. So do any of you briefly have anything that you want to say to the future generation of people who want to go into STEM? Is there anything
I
briefly?
think I can start.
Yeah.
Okay. So there was a question that we were talking about before we started this, and the question had to do with what if you're in STEM or you're going into STEM and you think you're not capable of it, or you just don't have enough confidence in yourself. And I think I can speak directly to that because I personally suffer from what's called imposter syndrome. So for those of you who don't know, it's a feeling that everyone else around you is just as good or better than you, and the position you've gotten to is purely by luck or chance and has nothing to do with their abilities. And I think that's something a lot of people are plagued by, and especially more successful people, because they tend to always like question like their performance and how they're doing and measure that, which is, I think, one of the reasons why they can improve themselves, but it could also be a downfall in that they lose confidence in themselves. So I just wanted to say that it's really normal. Almost, I guarantee you, everyone around you is also feeling some degrees of it. So don't let that get you down. Anyone else?
Yeah.
And I always talk first, so I'm.
No, you go. I
Okay.
really like that. That was really good.
Yeah.
It's very inspiring.
The only thing I'd like to say with regards to STEM, and this actually, if anyone's listening who's actually not even really interested in STEM, I'm just going by having now taught for several years and talked to several, several students in that. Do what you love, okay? This is going to sound bad. If there's any parents listening, please cover your ears right now. Don't feel forced that you have to do what your parents think you want to do. I love STEM. That's why I'm in it. My parents,
Same.
again, were very, do whatever you want. Though I have to admit, at one point, I think I gave my dad apoplexy because I was within 6 months of finishing my PhD, and I got him on the phone as a joke. I was like, Dad, I don't think I like this neuroscience thing. I'm going to transfer into marine biology. And I think he actually dropped the phone. I was like, I'm joking. You notice I chose another science, though. I wasn't going into, yeah. But you're going to be doing this. And as I said, you can change field, but you're going to be doing this the rest of your life. So try and find something that you love to do. Because if you're, I think I come across as fairly passionate about what I do, but that means it's enjoyable. If you have to go to work every day and hate your job, you just don't want to do it. So find something you're really passionate about, whether it's STEM or, something else. Because, and the other thing is, even though you think you might not be able to do it, you probably can. But
just give it a try.
Just
what
give it
do
a
you
try.
have to lose, right?
But do what you want, because you're going to be doing it for the next 40, 50 years type of thing.
But again, you can also switch directions and still work within the STEM community too.
That's
right?
true.
Right, you'll have options.
Oh yeah, no, I'm not saying that. As I said, I actually stayed relatively in the same field. People jump all over, but just find something you're really passionate about, because that's going to make it much more enjoyable to do.
Definitely.
Yeah. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, no, I agree. I definitely, I think that's a really good advice. And like, to add to it, I would say like explore early and often.
Yeah, that's another good thing.
The way I like to think of it is leave no door closed. Just open them, take a peek, see if you like it. No, that's great. Let's move on to the next one.
So I have to admit, because I was so interested in humans and all that when I was a kid, I was going to be a doctor. And then I've also volunteered at a hospital, and someone died in front of me. And as soon as that happened, I was like, I'm not going to be a doctor.
Yes,
because I'm like, and that's actually the interesting thing, because the only reason I found out about the field I ended up going to is my mom, the RN, went to a conference and came back and she said, I found the field for you. So, and then it's like, so just explore, find out your options, find out what and again, it might be something my goddaughter knew what she wanted to be when she was 12, and her younger sister, who is about to graduate high school, still doesn't know what she wants to be.
What does she want to be?
She wanted to be in film.
Oh.
Yeah. She started making little YouTube films and that from the 11, 12-year-olds.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Cool. Whereas she's very creative. I'm not creative. But so find something that you love. It might take you a while. You might have to explore it, but find something that you love.
Definitely.
Well, I think that's a really great place to end it. It looks like that's kind of all the time we have. So we have one more session left. So we hope that you also join us or watch the session that we have coming up on Wednesday. On behalf of Wisest, I would like to thank our 3 incredible panelists that have taken time out of their very busy days to come and help us out and connect with these awesome students. Our Wisest's next event for high school girls and non-binary students is our annual SET conference, and that's happening on November 23rd. So save the date. More information is happening for that. If you've registered for the event today, please just fill out the post-event survey that you'll also be getting in your email, and you can actually get a $20 discount to come to the SET conference, which is a pretty great deal. Yeah. So if you haven't registered yet, just visit the link in the description box, and we'll make sure to add that in there after the fact so you can go do that. So thanks for listening, and we hope to see you again on Wednesday.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.